Hello everyone and welcome to a new video of your Polyglot Academy. Today it's lesson 17 and we're going to talk about the separable verbs, so let's start. Now, here you can see two example sentences and both sentences focus on the verb anrufen. So the first one is kannst du mich bitte anrufen, which means could you call me please? And the second one is klar, ich ruf dich gleich an, which means sure, I'll call you right away. And everything seems to be normal, right? Well, as we said, if we consider the verb anrufen, which means to call someone, then you can see that there is a slight change between the first and the second sentence. In the first sentence, we simply have the infinitive form of anrufen, which is anruf. In the second sentence, however, we're building a normal sentence, so you would think of building the present simple. And as we already said, and as we already talked about this in lesson 4, in order to build the present simple of anrufen, in this case, we would say ich anrufe, because anrufen is a regular verb, right? But the problem with that is that anrufen is a separable verb. And in this case, we can see how this verb is kind of transformed into two parts. We have ich rufe erstmal. We have ich rufe firstly, which is kind of the first part of the verb. And then we're going to put the prefix of this verb, so in this case an, at the end of the sentence. And that is exactly the definition of separable verbs. So what are separable verbs? Separable verbs are simply verbs which are made up of a verb and a prefix. So in this case, anrufen is made up of a prefix an and the verb rufen. And the prefix sometimes detaches from the verb of the main sentence and it is placed at the end, just as we saw in the last example. As we introduced the normal sentence, the first sentence, then we simply had kannst du mich bitte anrufen with an infinitive sentence. And then in the second case, we had this transformation. We saw how the prefix detached from the verb and how it was put at the end of the sentence in the second example. Now, a question would be a common question would be that it might be difficult to distinguish separable verbs. So how do we do that? Well, as we already said, separable verbs are always characterized by specific prefixes. And in this table, you can see the most important ones which distinguish separable verbs, so that if you are going to see a verb which is beginning with these prefixes, then you're going to know that we're talking about a separable verb. So I would recommend you to learn these along with an example. So I will read them out loud. You have ab, bei, hin, weg, an, ein, los, zu, auf, fest, mit, zurück, aus, her, vor, zusammen. And right there, you can see some examples of separable verbs. So in this case, you have anmachen, for example, which means to turn on, ausmachen, which means to turn off, anrufen, to call, as we already said in the last example, absagen, which means to cancel, vorschlagen, which means to suggest, and so on. So there are lots of examples. And while analyzing these verbs, it is also very important to precise that there's a big difference between a separable verb and another verb, which is in fact very similar but does not have these prefix or has another prefix. So in this case, you can see two verbs, machen and anmachen. And at a first sight, you might think that the meaning is going to be the same one because machen and anmachen are very similar. However, machen means to make and anmachen means to turn on, as we saw from the table. So the meaning is not going to be the same as the prefix is going to change everything. So it is very important to consider the prefix while talking about these verbs. Following on, I'm going to discuss also how to form these separable verbs. So here you can see an example sentence. Ich möchte über diese Aufgabe nachdenken. And in this sentence, this is a more complex sentence because we're using a modal verb, möchten, in order to help the verb nachdenken, which is a separable verb, in order to build a complex sentence. Now, since nachdenken is a main verb and we're having a complex sentence, then we're not going to separate it. So this is a strict rule. And this also applies to an interrogative question. So for example, if we have möchtest du über diese Aufgabe nachdenken, we still have the same syntax with a complex verb. So in this case, with a modal verb, möchtest, and nachdenken, the separable verb, we're not going to separate it. However, if we are talking about a normal sentence, or about a normal interrogative sentence without any modals or without anything, where we simply have one main verb, which is the separable verb itself, as in this case with ich denke darüber nach, which means I'm thinking about it, then you can clearly see that we are putting the prefix at the end of the sentence. So this difference, this distinction is very important. And as I already mentioned before, this also applies to interrogative sentence. So if you grasp that, I would recommend you to do these exercises right there. Try to complete the following sentences by entering the separable verbs. And if you would like to, I will also post the solutions, or I will correct your exercises if you decide to leave a comment. And if you went so far, I'm very thankful for that. And I wish you a nice day, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.